acknowledge that we're on Treaty 4 territory, the homeland of First Nations and Métis people. I'm actually an outsider. I am originally from Treaty 3 territory over in Ontario, so it's really a privilege for me to be here to learn and to research and to teach on these lands. So I just want to make sure that I say that and acknowledge that. Okay. Before I begin too, I also just want to acknowledge, later on I'm going to tell you about a research project, or at least some of it, that I had with my colleagues from kind of across Canada. So their names are on here, so I just want to give a shout out to them as well, because I couldn't have done this research project without them. So I just want to make sure that I give them credit too. Okay, so for an outline, it's a little bit changed from the original abstract because I want to make sure that we have a chance to kind of get into some of this, which I think would be, I always like to incorporate experiential learning, so for all of us it's probably a lot more engaging and fun. So we'll review a little bit about the background of the methodology, then we'll actually participate in some things, which is why I have iPads here that we'll get into later. As I mentioned, we're going to look at just briefly one of the research projects that I've been involved with in terms of this methodology, and then I'll quickly share some insights on how this could be used in a research context, but then also in an educational context with students. So what is Photovoice? Maybe we can do a think, pair, share, so if you want to think about it and then chat with your partner, because I know some of us might have no experience, some of us might have a lot, so we can do that in just a minute or two and then we'll kind of come back together as a group, if that works. In terms of Photovoice, the cool thing about it is that it's been used in a bunch of different subject areas, about a bunch of different topics. So these are just some examples here. So this first one, they use Photovoice to explore doctoral candidates' experiences of comprehensive exams, which we all know are very stressful. Another one, a tool for understanding youth connections to their neighborhoods. So they had the youth go out, take pictures of their neighborhoods, and it was interesting because they really found that despite their neighborhood maybe not being in a positive light, this youth saw different aspects in a positive light. And were able to talk about their community and kind of bring things together. This last image, I know they're kind of hard to see from way back here. Last May in 2018, the government put out this document, which is a common vision for trying to get Canadians more physically active and decrease sedentary behavior. And it's really interesting because this is a national policy document, and actually in here they talked about using Photovoice as a way to try and help communities get their voices out there, figure out kind of what's going on, and think about solutions to help us get more physically active and have less sedentary behavior. So not only do we see it in research and education, but we're also seeing it in the broader community as well, which is pretty neat. Okay, so in terms of Photovoice, sometimes it's referred to also as photonovela or photonovel, but it's a visual methodology, as you probably gathered, that involves the capturing of images by participants, which is often guided by a research question, but it doesn't have to be all the time. The really neat thing about this is that the participants tell their own story, based upon their own lived experiences, and they kind of frame everything, which is why it goes back to that participatory action research methodology. It's really neat because in this methodology, participants are positioned as the expert, whereas in a lot of other times, us as researchers, we're seen as the experts, and we're kind of framing the research. And here it's really neat because the participants are the experts of their own stories, which is a different change from a lot of other methodologies. In this methodology, obviously the participants' knowledge is valued, but it's also accessible to so many people, and it can shed light on participants whose voices might not always be heard, and give us access to different environments or different communities, where as experts or as researchers, we might not be able to kind of get in there and get the real story. So it really lets them tell their own narrative and their own lived experiences. Because of that reason, this methodology is often used to stimulate social action and engage policymakers. And we're going to go through all those steps later on. So Photovoice goals: record and reflect on community strengths and concerns, critical discussion and knowledge about important community issues through the photographs that are gathered. And of course, as I mentioned, we want to make sure we're reaching policy members or policymakers so that change can actually happen. In terms of benefits, there's quite a lot, which is helpful. Some of these I've kind of touched on before, so I won't go into them too much. But in terms of those participants, so typically researchers are in control, but in this methodology, the participants are in control. And of course, as researchers, sometimes what we think is important can actually be totally different than what participants value and think is important. And so this is really good because it lets their voices be heard. We've already kind of mentioned that pictures kind of say 1,000 words, and so it's a really powerful tool to be able to use photographs. Photovoice is available to anyone who can use a camera. Back in the day, what they used to do was give out disposable cameras to their participants and then pay and have them all printed out. So now it's a lot easier. A lot of people have cameras. You don't need to be able to read and write. That doesn't matter. So it kind of makes it a lot more accessible for a range of different people. I already touched on access in terms of communities and spaces that we as researchers might not be able to get into. And then a really neat thing also is community pride and ownership. So participating in this experience, seeing the positives, the benefits of being in a community can really help with that pride and the ownership and being in a community and kind of bring everyone together, which is really nice. Some more benefits here. Can confirm or deny program goals when community needs are being assessed. It can actually bring other community members into the process. So for example, if this was our community, we could go to take pictures, but actually we could bring in other community members because they might want to be in pictures. They might ask, oh, hey, what are you doing? What are you engaged in? And this is a way to kind of build that community and strengthen it too. Tangible and immediate benefits to people in their networks. Some of the papers in the literature have said, you know, it's a really great thing for people to be able to capture these images and then keep them as well. And that kind of brings people together. There's immediate benefits. Especially in terms of that social action coming together. Illustrates community needs and assets, and then of course that social action that I've also touched on. In terms of limitations, there is a potential risk to participants if they're doing things, if there's difficult social or political climates. So depending on what the theme is or where they're trying to go with the concept, it could be a little bit of a risk. Obviously, personal judgment affects photos. There's a possible continuing cycle of material and status inequalities. So if we continue to perpetuate that, if there's people who don't have cameras, depending on who can be involved and participate in the project, that could potentially continue these inequalities. So that's something to just keep in mind when we're talking with participants, when we're working in communities. It can be difficult to analyze if we're just focusing on strictly the pictures. We're going to talk about different ways to kind of get around that. And then if you're doing large-scale applications, large-scale projects, you might need to work with different levels of government if we're trying to have social action happen. So that might be another thing just to consider. It might be a limitation of the methodology. And anyone can stop me at any time because it's informal if you have questions or anything like that as well. Alright, so in terms of steps to a Photovoice project, obviously you could adapt these if you need to depending on the space that you're working in, the community, who you're working with. We're going to conceptualize the problem first. We're going to figure out what we want to talk about, what kind of issues are going on. We're going to talk about devising initial themes for taking pictures. So sometimes in the literature, the themes have been used as research questions. So maybe we pick out 4 research questions and that guides our photography taking pictures. We're going to define broader goals and objectives. So really at the end of this project, what do we want to do with it? What's our ultimate goal? What stakeholders do we want to talk to? What's our social action? Where do we want to go with this? Conducting Photovoice training. So depending on what you want to do with your project, sometimes they've had in the past actual photography classes to help prep in terms of Photovoice. Sometimes they just let the participants take their own photos with obviously discussions around consent, so not just taking pictures of anyone without their consent, you know, taking high quality photos, so not blurry or anything like that. But the Photovoice training is something that you can play with. depending on what your goals are. Because sometimes when we have photography classes or we have a little bit more of an kind of an expertise influence, that can change how we perceive things and would want to take pictures as well. Taking pictures, obviously this needs to happen. Sometimes it can be over a semester if you're working with university students and this is part of their project. For us, when I talked about the project later, we had 2 months and we had to take 10 pictures over 2 months. So that really depends on how long you want to open up that opportunity, how long you have with that community, building those relationships, and that can be adapted as well. And then you're going to facilitate group discussion as a group, and then try and figure out, talk about those pictures, figure out where you want to go. Critical reflection and dialogue. Then you kind of start going in, glimpsing in a little bit closer as you go along. So you would come and have all these pictures from all the different members that are participating in the project, and they're going to want to start to slowly narrow those down and really have pictures that kind of identify the themes, those answers and solutions that you're looking for. And that kind of works in with the context and storytelling. Codifying issues, themes, and theories. Recruiting policymakers as the audience to learn the photo voice finding. Preparing photos and captions for presentation at reception. And so, for example, if you had all the policymakers come in and you had all your pictures displayed, inviting those stakeholders in, letting them know about what you've discovered, your voices, those stories, and then that's a great way to kind of have a celebration, but also making sure that those messages are getting across and having those photographs displayed as well. And then really, we want to make sure that those policymakers, donors, media, researchers, anyone who we want to make change, they're in that room when we're going through all those photographs, we're getting those messages across so that we can move forward with that social action. Okay, so what we're going to do, a little bit of a tweak from the abstract, but we're going to go through and we're actually going to go through some of the first steps of a photo voice methodology, obviously compressed quite a lot. And so for the sake of time, I've ironed out a problem. Normally we would all talk together, figure out something that is really driving us and do this together because it's, you know, participatory action research, it's all about our own individual voices. But just for the constraints of time, I've kind of ironed out some things. So in terms of a problem or something we want to talk about, I've decided on inclusion on a campus, although I'm totally free to be flexible and adapt as we go along. So that's kind of where we're going to stick with unless we want to change it, which is totally fair. I've also done a little bit of work ahead of time in terms of our initial themes. So working with these in terms of kind of positioning them as questions that we want to focus on. So how hard is it to be inclusive on campus? Where on campus do you see inclusion happening? And what aspects of the physical structures on campus help or hinder inclusion? Right? So those are kind of our guiding questions. So when we're thinking about taking pictures, which we're going to go out and do, these are things that are going to guide us and kind of bring us back to this overall theme and idea. The third step is defining those broader goals and objectives. So hypothetically, what would we want these to be? Or what could these potentially be? What would our goal be? If this is kind of our theme, where would we want to go with this? I know it's kind of a lot at one time.
Creating a more inclusive campus.
Creating more inclusive campus, absolutely, definitely.
Determining if there's enough physical structures or spaces to facilitate inclusive environment.
Okay, yeah, so our physical structures, looking at those, maybe seeing if we need to make adaptations or if they are fine as they are, or if there's something we can do with that to make sure we're accommodating and make sure people are included. Yeah. And who would we want to talk to about this at the end? If we're looking at social change, who are some policymakers, stakeholders, who would we want in the room when we're talking about at the end everything we found out?
Facility management.
Facility management, excellent, definitely. Yep. Anyone else?
University administration.
Yep, university administration.
Maybe some student associations or student groups.
Student groups, associations, definitely. Students in general.
Caretakers.
Caretakers, yeah. lots of different ways we could go with this, right? So we want to make sure that there is a goal at the end, that we have an objective, that we're moving forward and trying to meet that objective. Okay, so we are going to get into this. Photovoice training, we're not going to do a lot. Obviously, if you take pictures of someone else, make sure you have consent. You can go, we're going to have some time to go wherever you want. We'll gauge the time, maybe 10 minutes or so, to be able to go out and take images. If you want to take a picture of these questions, I can certainly bring this slide back up. So we'll have 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back and have a bit of a discussion about the photographs that you've seen or that you've taken in our groups. I have iPads here, but if you have a phone, you can use that as well. Let's say we will come back here at like around 12:30, and then we can start discussing what we found. So think about that greater skill of inclusion, but also those questions that I'll pop back up here. And you can go out of this building, you can stay in this building, whatever you want to do. And so we can do this individually, but if you want to share with a partner, that's fine too. Usually photo voices are individual voices that will come together collectively at the end. So it's up to you, whatever you want to do. But I've got iPads up here if you want to use your phone. We'll just be back here around 12:30, and then we can get into it a little bit more. So these would be the other steps that we would go through. If you want any of this information, I can send it to you. My email will be at the end too. But just to make sure that we kind of are going through these, at least the first beginning steps. And again, just because of time constraints, this is something that we would organically do together. I wouldn't just tell you, here's the problem, let's figure something out, or give you those research questions or themes. But this would be something that we would find important, that we would want to make action on and try and make a difference. So I'm just going to skip to the next section. So this is a project I'm just going to tell you a little bit about. A self-study, so a group of graduate students, including myself a few years ago, wanted to do a Photovoice investigation of our experiences as physical and health education graduate students. And what we found in the research was that there's a lot of studies that talked about what people in our experiences were like and our voices, but it wasn't actually the graduate students' voices. It was researchers talking about us, but not us participating in this sort of manner. So in terms of the research design, participatory research was obviously a big part of that, and we wanted to use the Photovoice, specifically methodology, where we could take photographs, especially because you'll see all of us were spread across Canada, so it's a little bit harder, especially if you want to get these different voices, and taking photographs that are easy to send, easy to talk about over the phone, so that's kind of the direction where we wanted to go. Just to give you a background on some of the participants, so mostly female, some actually split half and half between master's and PhD, range of ages. Some of us were placed in or housed in a kinesiology or health faculty, and some of us were in an education faculty. And then we had a variety of different themes and subject areas that we were focusing on for our graduate studies. You can kind of see that maybe not these stars are a little small, but where we were kind of from, obviously some provinces and territories are missing. It was open to graduate students, and whoever had responded and wanted to be involved with that, that's who ended up participating in this study. So we adapted from that protocol that I showed before, those steps. Just a little bit of a different thing. So for us, we took 10 photographs over those 2 months, which I mentioned before. And then we would have phone conversations to kind of iron out where we wanted to go. We ironed out a theoretical framework that we wanted to use as well. But let's get into the themes. So we had 3 big themes and then 3 sub-themes within each, and there's photographs to kind of identify and give a little bit of a rationale for those themes. And for a lot of us here at the university, these will probably be themes that are relevant to you as well, and things that you experience too. So work knowing no bounds. Let me just get my notes here to make sure I'm covering everything. So basically this theme was about the time-intensive struggles of having to do all this work, coming in early, staying late, trying to actually schedule in physical activity, and for us, that's our passion, and even we had to schedule it in to make sure it was happening. in alongside all the other work that's getting done and having that work-life, or trying to have that work-life balance. Some of the students talked about time in terms of money, so in terms of finances, having to fill out those sheets for your supervisor, how many hours you worked, and then trying to kind of handle whether you should, you know, if you worked actually a lot more hours to be able to get that thing done, do you tell your supervisor, all these different struggles in terms of, you know, having this experience of our work not really having an end and a start. So it's not like we start at 8:30 and we go home at 4:30, it's always there. So this was a theme that came out. Several people did take photographs of their scheduler or their planners. And then there was a lot of talking about finances as well, and kind of funding and the pressures on graduate students there. An interesting point about this too was that we found that when students first came into their graduate studies program, they really kind of had no idea what they were signing up for. So in terms of finances or funding, it's kind of an unknown. So these are a lot of things that we could pull together, these things at the end of the day, to talk to supervisors about, to talk to graduate studies departments about, to try and make some changes going forward. Something else that's probably pretty typical for most of us is that all the different multiple hats and roles that we take on as a graduate student and as a researcher. And so this one's kind of interesting. So this participant, you know, took the picture from the back of the room showing that they're kind of having that student role, but then also from the front of the room as well, being a lecturer, being a researcher. And it's really interesting because all of these roles came up. So we talked about all these things, but interestingly enough, the last one that everybody ever talked about was being a student. So it's interesting to kind of think about these roles and how we perceive ourselves, and to try and juggle and strive to juggle all these different hats and keep all these balls in the air was definitely a theme that came out, and that was a struggle for a lot of us. Although those were, if we're looking at, we used Dewey's theory, so miseducative and educative experiences. So some of those things I already talked about were kind of more miseducative, a little bit of a thing that might want us to stop having these experiences. But this one is a positive one, it's a beneficial one. Our experiences of feeling fortunate being in our graduate programs. So having the opportunity to work with students, kind of link theory in with practice, was a really great way for us to be able to feel very fortunate. So in this one, working with students, helping us with our motivation, our drive to want to make changes, and to inspire us to kind of keep moving forward. This tree, and this came from Max, these are all pseudonyms, but kind of building our roots, so kind of spreading out, having our roots in the community, because a lot of our work was community-based, so instead of working in labs, we got out there, we worked with communities, we started to build these relationships and foundations, and that was something that we all saw as a benefit. One of the other things was kind of this development of our professional learning community. So despite the fact that we were spread out across Canada, and usually in physical education people are quite isolated, there's not very many of us at one institution, this was a way for us to kind of build relationships and a support system. And we really wanted to capitalize on the fact that, especially as graduate students, you need to have that support system in whatever way you find it, whether that's within your own subject area or community, or if that's outside your discipline. And this is something that can help us, help support us, keep us going with our graduate studies. So we all know that is a stressful, difficult time of our lives, and this can really be a huge benefit to students, regardless of what you're in and what your background is. Our third theme was our experience of being in limbo. And so there's we have our three sub-themes under here. So the first one, and this is, I know it's difficult to see, a picture of on a gymnasium door saying that you can't use the gymnasium unless you've booked it or something like that. And so this one kind of spoke to the challenges and threats to physical education. And a lot of us had different images that helped kind of this theme come through. So in terms of physical education being marginalized or not being valued by society, these issues kind of came through in this theme. being here nor there. So somebody described being in your graduate work kind of on this carousel, and another person had a picture of going up and down stairs. You're not really quite sure where you're at because there's always something next. You might get, feel like, somebody said, I might feel like a rock star researcher one day when you get a paper accepted, and then the next day you get a bunch of revisions and all these things happen, so you're constantly going up and down. And so that contributed and came through in this theme of kind of being in limbo and not really sure where we're at and not having stability as you're going through graduate studies. This was our third theme, which I highlighted in my title of this presentation. And I'm going to read it just to make sure I don't mix anything up. So this sub-theme we found to be very critical, and we called it Treading Water, and it's focused on the theme of mental health. Evelyn used this photo to explain her feelings of anxiety that are exasperated by graduate school. In discussions about this photo, Max, someone else, thanked her for sharing her picture and said, "To be honest, sometimes I feel alone in that thought, and I actually took a photo of this, but I didn't share it because I wasn't sure it would resonate with everyone. So after our last call, I walked away being like, it's not just me." So this was a really kind of a shining point because we realized that a lot of times we're isolated and we don't talk about our mental health, especially as graduate students. And so it's really interesting to see that somebody did have this experience, they did have this voice, but because they thought that it wouldn't resonate or that others wouldn't feel the same way, they didn't share the photograph. And so we ended up talking a lot about mental health supports for graduate students, what kind of environment is supportive in terms of mental health, or which practices are not supportive in terms of mental health. And so this was another way that we can move forward in that, when we had talked about that step 3, those objectives, this is another way that we could start to make changes, talking to admin, talking to our supervisors, right, and really having that social change, because we know that mental health is a huge thing, and we want to make sure that our graduate students are supported and that they don't feel alone, right? A lot of times we don't tend to talk about our feelings, and there's a big stigma, and we're seeing this in graduate students, and we want to make sure that they have the support that they need moving forward too. So those are our kind of results that came out of this, this project. This project, we just submitted the paper for it, so it's under review right now. But we found this was a really great way to build our community, to come together and to try and make social change for not only us at the time as graduate students, but also moving forward for future graduate students as well. Just in terms of some insights, obviously we kind of seen that this can be used in a research setting, but it can also be used in an educational setting as well. The really neat thing again is that it allows students to be the experts and have their own voice. It lets them be creative. In one of my classes actually on Friday, I have a 3rd-year course, and they did a Photovoice project as one of their assignments. So they've been collecting pictures throughout the whole semester about their experience with outdoor education in winter, which some of us was a long way to go, a growth mindset. But on Friday we're going to celebrate, we're going to talk about those different photographs. So in this case, in terms of the educational setting, they can be creative. If they want to have a PowerPoint presentation where the photos screen through and they have a narration over top that you can listen to, that's one way to do it. If you want to have a scrapbook, it lets the students kind of have their own creative voice in there, and not everything's so constrained. And for me, I feel like they're a lot more excited about doing a Photovoice project than writing a bunch of essays for me, but that's neither here nor there. It lets the student brings up issues that are important to them, and it can be used across subject areas. It's not like it can only be used in physical education or in outdoor education. We've seen it in psychology when people are talking about death and dying. It's really great to be able to use in different subjects where we might feel that are hard to talk about, but it gives us a starting point that we can move from there. In this, it's really nice because those students can show me their growth, their knowledge, their skills, and they can really kind of sometimes get out those things and share their knowledge that they might not be able to get across if they were writing an essay, or if they were filling out a survey, or doing my student evaluations at the end of the year. So that is it. Thank you so much for coming. I know this semester has a lot going on, so I really appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.